Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for life, the precious life that you have given to us at great cost to yourself. We thank you and we praise you. Forgive us for taking for granted the many blessings that you have given to us. Lord, our hearts and minds are connected or softened by the tragedy that's going on the other side of the world, that many people are dying, and that in a meaningless war over foolishness. Please, Father, we ask that your Spirit would be present, and that through the chaos and the horror of all that mess, that people would see their need for you, and they would turn their hearts towards you, when they would call out to you. Just bless us tonight as we open your word. Just draw near to us and help us not just to need information or insights about the Bible, but actually things that you are showing us our own heart, and that you're actually saving us from ourselves, that we will be children of your kingdom because we spent time at your feet and we listened to your voice, and we were willing to die to self and to allow you to work in us to will and do your own good pleasure. Just bless us, we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. So we're going to read Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Solomon says, Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. For they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. For a dream comes through the multitude of busyness, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. Verse 4.
When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better it is that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands? Verse 7.
Verse 7, for the multitude of dreams and many words, there is also vanity, but fear God. If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials over them. Verse 9, moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field.
He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them, and what good is there to the owners thereof, saving by the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. Verse 13.
There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? Verse 17.
All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he had much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor, that he take it under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. Every man also to whom God had given riches and wealth, and had given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in their labor. This is a gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answered him in the joy of his heart.
So we've been talking about, I've been sharing with you that Solomon has this creation, the creation model in the back of his mind as he's trying to figure out reality. And he begins with the idea of creation from Genesis 1 in chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, he makes a statement that he's trying to find the good. So what he's trying to do is find what is good, or find the good, again, going back to creation, Genesis chapter 1, everything that God creates is good, and that sin, because sin came in, everything became twisted. And so now everything is vanity. There's meaningless, everything is meaningless. There is no good under the sun. And then so he's actually going through the process to try to find what is good. And he actually going through the process of all these things that he believed would make it good or make his life have value. That he's going through the process of realizing, and he experiences them, and he realizes, well, that's not the good, whether it's wealth or building something or whatever, as he's gone through. So again, following the concept of Solomon's thinking, that he's actually in Genesis, and he's in the creation story, and he's actually talking about the fall that takes place in the creation story. Then when you look at what he's saying, again, it begins to make sense. So in chapter 5, he says to keep your foot when you go to the house of God. Be ready to hear, then to give the sacrifice to fools who they do not consider that they do evil. The first word there, keep, is the word shamar, and that's the same in Genesis 2:15. Adam was given two things in Genesis, two responsibilities. He was to work, he was to keep and to work the garden. The word keep is to shamar. Literally, he was to preserve the way to the tree of life. And so here, Solomon is talking about shamar, to keep your foot when you go to the house of God. And the idea here is he's going to talk about the tongue and talking. And you remember in when Eve was deceived, what happened at the tree, that she starts talking to the serpent's talking back to her. And what she does is that she doesn't pay attention to what she's saying, and she actually overstates what she said. Remember, the serpent said, did God say you shall not eat from the trees? And she says, well, God said we should not eat of it, nor shall we touch it, lest we die. And God didn't say anything about touching the tree, right? So she actually overstates what she's saying, and Satan takes the words that she added and uses them against her. Of course, Mrs. White is insightful. He actually plucks the fruit, puts it in her hand, and says, see, you're touching it and you didn't die. And then, of course, he uses that. So he's using this idea that she's overstating what she's supposed to be stating as a means of deception. And the idea here is that part of the be like God lie that we accept is that because when God creates, he speaks, and it is Genesis, right? So in the be like God lie, we think that when we speak and our words actually alter or change reality, when in fact, we speak and our words don't change a thing. But see, that's part of the lie. So you'll see here that in the first two verses, he's talking specifically about listening rather than speaking, and the futility of speaking. The idea of be like God lie, that our words actually change anything, and that we're supposed to draw near to God to listen, not to speak. This idea of being rash with your mouth, and to utter a word, or any word, and that word thing is literally daba, it's the word before God. God is in heaven, you're on earth, therefore let your words be few. There's many things that come to mind in the scriptures. I think of Habakkuk, God is in his holy temple, let the earth be silent before him. It reminds me of the transfiguration on the Mount. Don just asked me about Matthew 16:17. Remember, they're on the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus is glorified, and then Peter starts running off at the mouth, right? He starts, oh Lord, should we build 3 tabernacles? And it's so great that we're here. And God speaks, and he says, he says, "This is my son. Listen to him." In other words, Peter, stop running your mouth and listen, right? And the same idea here is that the covenant that we had with God, covenant that God makes with us, is that the covenant with God in Exodus 15 is that if we listen to his voice, and we will be his people and he will be our God. So the idea is, if I listen to his voice, then I'll enter into his rest. So the covenant is for me to listen, Shema. In the Old Testament, the word faith is actually the word Shema, that I would listen. So you listen, and then you think, and then you choose wisely, right? So the idea is, I listen to God's voice, and then if I listen to God's voice and I reason, and then I accept his voice, his word, then I enter into this covenant relationship with him, and then I'm changed, I'm transformed. So this idea of me speaking when I should be listening is a huge problem within our fallenness. Now, you'll notice here this chapter
in Proverbs 10:19, it says, "In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise."
That's
And then
right.
further, Proverbs 18, it says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue."
That's right.
Mm.
You'll see here also, this chapter really impresses you that the book of James, when James is writing the book of James, he actually has Ecclesiastes in his mind. And you'll see James has a whole chapter in James chapter 3 about the tongue, and how the tongue is evil, and if any man can control the tongue, he's a perfect man. So same thing that Jim is mentioning to us about Proverbs. This is all over the scriptures, obviously. Of course, James is also going to talk about the oppression, the people being oppressed, the rich people oppressing the poor, that he talks about here in Ecclesiastes. So the book of James is a good background. Actually, Ecclesiastes is the background in the mind of James as well when he's writing James. But
Ecclesiastes and Proverbs are the same author.
That's right. That's right. So again, when you go back to Genesis and the story of Genesis, you begin to realize that Satan catches us in our words because we say more than we should say, when silence is what we should be. The wise person, he listens and increases knowledge, right? But the fool talks and talks. So that's what he begins with. Now you'll notice in verse 3, he says, "A dream comes through the multitude of busyness, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of the words." So the idea here is that when God is challenging us to grow, the multitude of busyness, remember, every event that happens is a gift that comes from God, and God is using the events of our life to show us our need for God, that he's the only source of good, that I have to come back to him, right? So this idea that's what the idea of busyness is, or business is. And then he says, a dream comes to the multitude of business. So the idea, what happens is that God is putting you through a situation for you to learn, and instead of learning, your mind runs off into a myth, and you create your own little imagined reality called a dream. And a dream isn't real, but in your mind, you go there because you're relieving the tension, or the difficulty, or the stress, or the strain of going through the process of seeing what's actually going on, and then seeing your need to come back to God. Because of course, everything in this world that we go through, as he says in Ecclesiastes 1, the more the knowledge, the more the pain, right? The more you understand what's happening, the more the sorrow, right? And so we run away, we function by how things feel. And when things get feeling bad, then I run off to go shopping, or I stuff chocolate in my mouth, or I go watch TV, or I go do something. And when really what I'm doing is I'm escaping reality, and I'm escape reality by going to a place that's imaginary. It's really a myth. It's a lie. It's a dream. And of course, we create our own little realities. I mean, some people play video games, or whatever vice you want to talk about, that he's talked about in chapter 2. So the idea here is that the dream comes, the idea to escape reality comes when God is trying to show me how the events of my life are showing me that I believe a lie about what is good, and I need to come back to God. And that's the same thing he's saying. He repeats it twice about a fool's voice and the multitude of their words. That a fool actually thinks that by talking and describing reality, he can actually change it. Of course, that's not true, right? So this all goes to verse 4. When thou takest a vow or an oath unto God, don't defer to pay it. He has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. It's better not to vow than they should pay and not vow. So the idea here is, see, the original vow or the original oath, the original covenant that God makes with Adam and Eve and with the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. The original covenant was simply this, that if you listen to my voice, then I will be your God and that you will be my people. That's it. That's all that he says. By the way, that's what he desires of us. If we would listen to his voice, then he will be our God and we'll be his people. So because of our desire to do things, because we have to do things, then we kept saying, like they said to Moses, go up the mountain, hey, you talk to God and come back and tell us whatever he tells you to tell us to do, we'll do it. Well, so the covenant became a covenant of doing things. But of course, they couldn't do it, right? No matter what God asked them to do, they can't do it. You can't produce good or righteousness on your own. So the idea here that he's talking about in terms of this vow or this oath is that the oath is you're supposed to be listening to God's voice and then allowing what God is telling you to transform, to change you, instead of you trying to fix things on your own. That's why he says in verse 6, suffer not thy mouth to cause your flesh to sin. Neither say before the angel that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? By the way, James elaborates a lot on this same thing, right? That your tongue is evil, that we say out of the same mouth, we say things we say we love someone, then we say we hate someone else, or we say, good and evil comes out of the same spring and something's wrong with us, right? So James spends a lot of time with that. So, of course, James also connects this idea of speaking, part of the be like God lie that that God is trying to show us to bring us out of, is also connected with this idea of oppression of the poor. Now he talks quickly here after the oppression of the poor about the riches. So same as James talks about rich people oppressing. But I would like to first of all connect the oppression of other people with what comes out of our mouth, right? That many times we say hurtful things to someone or about someone that we should not be saying, that we have no right to try to identify what's going on in somebody else's heart. And so many times we run our mouth about gossiping, or we say stuff about people, or we come to conclusions in our thinking, and then we speak when we should be silent. And that a lot of our words are actually oppressive or hurtful. And, I think all of us have those experiences where you say something and you realize as soon as you said, oops, I wish I'd thought before I let that come out of my mouth. And then you deal with the aftermath of the damage that comes when you say something that's hurtful, something that's oppressive. And of course, sin is the oppressor, and every one of us is oppressed by sin. And so for us to add hurt or oppression to a fellow brother or sister, or even someone we consider to be our enemy for whatever reason, to add more hurt or oppression to them because of what comes out of our mouth is not wise. I mean, it's obviously that we're not understanding what God is desiring. So again, he's challenging us. Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what comes out of our mouth actually reveals what's in our heart, and that's critical. That's something that we need to pay attention to, because it's what's in our heart that God is trying to show us, because that's what He's trying to fix. And if our heart is right, then what will come out of our mouth is right. But if our heart isn't right, then what comes out of our mouth isn't right. And of course, that's what Jesus spent a lot of time talking about as well.
So that's why Jesus said to pray for our enemies and bless those that
curse you. Right. That's right. That's right. And we should be speaking words of faith. right? That's the phrase that Mrs. White used. We should be speaking words of faith. Again, I think I've shared this before, but when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, and he says, "Go call your husband," and she says, "Well, I have no husband." And Jesus is so neat. He says, "You're right." If you and I were there, we wouldn't be saying she's right. We'd say, "You liar." You've had, and we'd nail her for how wrong she was. And Jesus says, "No, you're right in what you're saying." So he affirms, yeah, what you said is right. Yeah, he speaks faith, and then he tells her the truth, and then which is so profound, right? That God seeks to find in us the things that he can affirm before he shows us the things that he's trying to fix. So he's showing us he loves us first. He accepts us and he receives us. And then when we see that he loves us and accepts us and receives us, then he talks about the things in us that he wants to fix, the things in us that he wants us to see and acknowledge that he wants us to let go of. See that's God. It's beautiful. And if we would treat each other that way, if we would find in our enemies things that we can affirm, or things that we can support, or things that we can encourage people about, and let them know that we care and that we have their good in mind, what's best for them in our hearts, then when we do actually begin to share, maybe we have an insight about an area they need to grow. When we begin to share that, they would listen to what we say because they know we care about them. Once they know you care, then they care about what you know. But if they know you don't care, then they don't care what you say. They're not going to listen to you.
Right.
And so, Jesus modeled these things, which was very amazing. And the other thing about speaking, James talks about, be quick to listen and slow to speak. When you read the Gospels, you begin to realize, Jesus really doesn't say very much. That most of the time when Jesus listens and he takes in lots of information, and then usually when he speaks, it's just little short phrases. Now, I know that some of us, we read his sermons, like the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on Matthew 24, and we see all this read and we think Jesus is talking a lot. But when you read the stories of him encountering people in everyday situations, and he goes places, he doesn't say very much. And then the words that he says are very significant. He says very few words, and every one of them matter. And I think that that's what God is desiring for us, that we would think things through, and then the words that we say, we would realize the import of those words. So we would think it through carefully, and then when we do speak, we would use as few words as possible, and the words that we would say would be significant. Of course, it's Solomon who tells us in Ecclesiastes, the more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that benefit anybody, right? So this is a huge issue, as James tells us. No man can tame the tongue. It's a source of evil, and that so this is something obviously that is very important.